Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how I painted these macaroons with watercolors. So if you're new here, hi, my name is Neha Subramaniam. I am a professional watercolor and a colored pencil artist, and I give weekly tutorials here on my channel. So let's get started. For this painting, I have used a heavyweight paper. This is from Arch, 300 pounds hot pressed paper. So I have just taped it to my board and I have not stretched it. I'm using a regular plate as my palette today and my color box. The color mixes that I'll be using, I'll explain it to you as we move along in the video. So first of all, I'll just lighten off my sketch with a kneaded eraser. This will absorb all the excess graphite. So I'm using my size 4 brush and we will be working on the top half of the macaroon. So for the first wash, I'll be working wet on wet. So I'm just giving a clean water glaze to the top half of the macaroon. And I'll show you how this glaze should be. A very even glaze, as you can see from the sides. Okay, there are no puddles or any dry areas anywhere. And now my first color is this Van Dyke brown mixed with a little bit of Winsor violet. All the colors will be listed in the description box below. And I start with the darkest area that I see on that part. Now this is burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of Winsor violet again. So this is going to be our mid-tone color. Since I'm working wet on wet, I'm taking my own time applying my colors. And I like to mix the colors on the paper rather than on the palette so that they look really nice and fresh. So I'm leaving the area where there is a highlight. Now to these browns, I'm also adding some rose madder lake. I love mixing different kinds of colors to irregular brown looking subjects such as violets and blues and pinks. This makes the painting really interesting. And if you look closely, you definitely see some pinks and some yellows and sometimes even some violets in these browns. For the first wash, always keep all your colors very light and transparent. Now there is nothing on my brush and I'm just helping that color to go in a little bit into the highlight. Adding more and more color since I've got time. The painting is still wet. I'm adding neat Winsor violet to the very darkest shadow regions. And this is a mixture of burnt sienna plus Winsor violet. Now when your painting starts to dry a bit, with a very clean damp brush, I start lifting off the very lightest highlights. And after every lift, I wash my brush and just dab it on the towel or a tissue and lift those areas again. Now to create that texture which is there on the macaroon, I just lift off some dots. And if your painting has dried up, then you can just add little bit of small drops of water to create that texture. Those small drops of water will just push away those colors, and you'll be left with those lighter markings on the painting. So here I'm just lifting off the highlight. Observe the reference picture very closely, and to get a realistic looking painting, give all the details. Now I work on the bottom part in the same way. Working in small sections allows me to have a good control on my watercolor washes. And on the extreme left where it's receiving light, I'm adding some raw sienna. Keeping all the edges very neat at all the stages, and adding more Winsor violet into the shadow areas. Again, I'm just lifting off some dots, and where it's dried up, I'm just adding little drops of water. Now for the very dark chocolatey part, I'm taking Van Dyke brown. You can even use burnt umber mixed with a little bit of Winsor violet. This gives you a very nice chocolate brown color. And I'm working again wet on wet, still making it very dark. Always give a good contrast in your paintings. Adding a little bit of rose madder lake also. And now with a clean damp brush, I'm just lifting off the highlights wherever I see. Mixing Van Dyke brown plus rose madder lake. Okay, giving a very uneven edge to this one. And adding more Winsor violet to the very dark shadow areas. Now with my hair dryer, I dry off all these areas. You can even leave it to dry naturally. Now I'm using size 2 brush. The painting is completely dry because I want to work now in between those areas, and I'm going to create that crumbly texture that you can see. So I'm going to work wet on dry. So this is burnt sienna plus Winsor violet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scribble with my brush, leaving some pockets of white of the paper. So this way you will find that you're creating that sort of texture. So I'll just show it to you over here. You can call this scribbling or whatever. Okay, but the most important part is to leave some lighter gaps. And as I am going more into the left area where it is more bright, leave more white gaps. And also I'm using more of burnt sienna into my very bright areas. Okay, now this has to dry completely. So now I'm adding all the darker portions in that same area. So just squint your eye and look out only for the very dark patches. In your first wash, in your first layer, everything will look very untidy. It's okay. I did the same thing on the second lower part also. And now once it is dry, then what I do is I take a very light transparent wash of burnt sienna and I just go over the entire textured part that we have just painted. So this way it will cover all those white gaps, but still it will be having that light tone. Okay, we don't want it completely white areas, but a very light color. But for this, your initial layer has to be dried completely. Work in small sections and stage by stage, layer by layer. That way you will have full control and the painting will not be so intimidating. Okay, so I finished this first layer and I did the same thing on the second macaroon as well, and even on the plate. So now I'll show you how I work on the details on the first one again. So I'm again going to wet the surface with clean water. Now when you're doing it for the second time, when you're putting a water glaze for the second time, do it very gently so as not to move any colors below. And we just need a very light layer of water. And now again I am adding my shadow colors. And as I'm moving more towards the left, the colors become more and more brighter. So I'm using more and more of raw sienna and burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of rose madder lake. And I'm working wet on wet because I want everything very soft looking. And where you don't want any color, you just go over with a damp brush. And for the highlights, again, I take my damp brush and just lift some of the areas off. Adding more Winsor violet in the shadow region. Now I do the same thing on the top portion as well. Again, here I want to work wet on wet. So very gently I'm applying a layer of water. Same colors. So I start with Winsor violet. I love mixing Winsor violet with browns to make it darker rather than using any blacks. This really gives a good intense brown shadow areas. And this is burnt sienna plus a little bit of Winsor violet. And this is raw sienna. Raw sienna and rose madder lake, the yellow and the pink will really brighten up this macaroon. And slowly I'm approaching the highlight area. In watercolors, it's very important to reserve your whites of the paper as we don't have white color. Adding more of pink. I really loved this pinks and yellows into my browns. It really made it so shiny and glossy, just like honey coated macaroons. This is a full real-time tutorial on my Patreon. The first part is already published and the second part will be published on Monday. So if you're interested in learning realistic style of painting in watercolors and colored pencils, then think of joining my art community on Patreon. I post weekly content over there, and I try to incorporate different kinds of subjects for an all round learning experience. So, here again, I'm dropping very small drops of water to create that texture, and again, I left it completely to dry. So, now for the very dark chocolate area, I'm going in with my Van Dyke brown and Winsor violet. Try to make your darks as dark as the reference picture and your light very light. This contrast will really make your paintings or your drawings pop from the page. It will attract the viewers. So this is size 2 brush I'm using. So I'm only applying this in the very dark areas, and now with our mid-tone, which is burnt sienna plus Winsor violet, I'm just going over the entire section. So this will just tone down our very light highlights, but that's at the same time we still are able to see the lighter portions. Now this is my gray mix, which I have mixed by mixed with three primary colors: French ultramarine blue, Winsor red, and Sennelier yellow deep. So I'm also using a lot of my mixed gray in this painting. So this is our detailed layer detailed stage. So I'll be going in with my microscopic eye into painting all the details. So I'm coloring all the dark pockets first. Same thing on the bottom part as well. Watercolors tend to dry a little bit lighter, so you have to give um, more layers to achieve that dark intensity of color. So this tutorial is actually also about that how to achieve that these dark intense colors with different layers, but we'll be using so many layers of transparent washes that in the end your painting will still have that transparent kind of look and not very opaque kind of look. So now I'm coloring it in with our mid-tone, which has burnt sienna in it. So I'm going over that entire textured area. After doing the top and the middle part, I feel that the bottom part looks a little bit more lighter and duller. So I'm again going in with third wash on this lower part. And since we have a lot of components in this painting, the two macaroons, and then we also have the plate and then the shadow, normally what I do is I just finish 90 to 95% of each component, and then in the end I look at the painting as a whole and I give tweaks here and there to the entire painting. So if you like my content on this channel, then do think of subscribing to my channel. I will be bringing in more valuable content here. So do subscribe if you haven't already. And now what I'm doing here is I'm just giving some shadows under those lighter spots so that they just look like a 3D bumps on the macaroon. And I'm just lifting off some of the uh, lighter dots. So if you don't have any of those after you've done so many layers, then you can just do those first, and then you can give a shadow with your darker color, with a darker shadow color, like how I'm doing here. So this macaroon is complete now, and similarly I do the second one and the plate. Now I'll show you how I paint the shadows. So I'm taking my size 6 brush to apply water, and I'll be using my gray mix. So I have given a clean water glaze to the shadow region. Now I use a little bit watery gray color. I don't go in very dark very soon. Okay, my waterline is much further ahead. And now I'll be dropping all these colors in the shadow area as well, which will be our reflected colors. Again, the water line is much further ahead, so don't apply color exactly where your water is. And I'm just dropping in all those colors that we have used on the painting on the left side and the right side. More gray in the center portion, and then with a very clean damp brush I just start stopping that color from spreading more. Keep on doing this and keep an eye on the painting. So I'm dropping in more gray while the painting is still wet. And I'm doing this with a bigger brush so that I can move from point A to B much more faster. I'm also adding some rose madder lake since we have already used it on the painting. So again, with a clean damp brush, I just stop that color from spreading, and I lift off the light from here as well. So I left this layer to dry completely, and now there is a reflected light just below that plate. So I'm taking my lifting brush. This is a chisel blender brush from Princeton. So I just dip that in water and start scrubbing gently on the paper to lift out some highlights. This is not a very hard brush with hard bristles, so it will not damage your paper. And with my size 1 brush, I'm just going to take raw sienna and a little bit of burnt sienna, and I'll paint over this lifted area. So in this way, I give more layers, more layer to the shadow region, and I give more details, and I finish off the painting. So if you have enjoyed watching this preview from my online tutorial, then do give it a like. And as I've already told you, if you have not subscribed, please think of subscribing to my channel. And the link to my Patreon will also be in the description box below. So see you in the next video then. Bye.